I invited my son and his wife to a family dinner. After the meeting, I checked my bank account. It was empty. When I called my son, they were already heading to the airport with the money. What I did next made them. Good day, dear listeners. It's Louisa again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Dorothy Callahan, and I am 71 years old. I live in a house I have owned for 43 years on a quiet street in Columbus, Ohio, where the oak trees are older than half the neighborhood and the winters come in hard and stay long. My husband, Gerald, died 8 years ago. He left me with a paid-off mortgage, a small pension, and $94,000 in a savings account that we had built together over 4 decades. Dollar by dollar, birthday by birthday, every Christmas when we said no to new coats and yes to the future. That money was not a fortune, but it was mine. It was ours. And for 8 years after Gerald was gone, I kept it safe, the way you keep a photograph of someone you loved. Carefully, quietly, knowing it cannot be replaced. I had one son, Derek. He was 44 years old, broad-shouldered, with his father's chin and, I would eventually understand, none of his father's conscience. I had loved Derek the way mothers love sons, completely and with a blindness I am not proud of. He had married Tiffany 6 years before all of this happened. Tiffany, who wore her nails long and her smiles short. Tiffany, who called me Dorothy instead of Mom from the very first day and somehow made it sound like an insult. I told myself she was simply modern, independent. I made excuses the way old women do when they are afraid of the alternative. The first warning sign came 14 months before the dinner. Derek called me on a Tuesday evening, which was unusual. He was not a Tuesday caller. He said he and Tiffany were thinking about investing in a property, a rental unit down in Nashville. He said it carefully, the way people speak when they have rehearsed. He asked if I had ever thought about putting my savings to work. I said I was comfortable where I was. He said, "Sure, Mom, of course," and changed the subject so smoothly I almost didn't notice the change at all. The second warning sign came 4 months later. Tiffany, not Derek, Tiffany, asked me over lunch whether I had a will, whether it was updated. She said it with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, stirring her iced tea and looking at me the way a person looks at a locked cabinet they intend to open eventually. I said yes, it was handled. She nodded. The subject died. But something in me did not forget. Could I see it then? What was coming? Not fully. Not yet. But something in my chest had shifted, the way the air shifts before a storm you cannot yet name. The dinner was my idea. It was a Sunday in March, the kind of Ohio Sunday that can't decide between winter and spring. I cooked a pot roast the way Gerald had liked it, with carrots and rosemary. I set the table with the good plates. Derek arrived with a bottle of wine and a hug that lasted exactly 1 second less than a real hug should. Tiffany brought flowers, tulips, yellow, already beginning to droop. We sat. We ate. We talked about nothing that mattered. And sometime between dessert and the door, while I was in the kitchen washing up and they were saying their goodbyes in the hallway, something happened. Something I did not see. I walked them to their car. I waved. I came back inside and put the leftover pot roast in the refrigerator and sat down with a cup of tea and the quiet that has been my companion for 8 years. It was not until the following morning that I opened my banking app to transfer money for my utility bill. The number I saw made no sense. I read it 3 times. I set the phone down. I picked it up again. $12.47. $94,000. Gone. My hands did not shake. That surprised me. They simply went still, the way very old hands do when the body understands before the mind does that something has ended. I called Derek. It rang 4 times. He answered with a brightness in his voice that told me everything before he said a single word. Mom, hey, actually, we're kind of in the middle of something right now. Can I call you back? I heard it behind his voice. The ambient noise, the announcements, the rolling of luggage wheels. Derek, I said. Where are you? A pause. 1 beat too long. We're at the airport, Mom. We're heading out for a little trip. I was going to call you when we landed. I hung up. I sat in Gerald's old armchair by the window, and I looked at the oak tree in the front yard, the one that was there before we bought the house, the one that had outlasted my husband and would likely outlast me. And I made a decision. I was not going to cry, I was going to act. I did not sleep that night. Not because I was crying, I told you, I had made a decision about that, but because my mind would not stop calculating. That is what grief does to practical women. It doesn't sink us into stillness. It turns us into accountants. $94,212. That was the exact figure in my savings account the week before. I knew it precisely because I checked every Friday morning with my tea, the way Gerald used to check the weather before bed. A habit, a ritual, now a record. How had they done it? That was the first question that kept circling. I hadn't given Derek my account number. I hadn't given him my password. I hadn't signed anything. Or had I? I sat in the kitchen at 3 a.m, and I went back through every piece of paper I had touched in the last 6 months, and then I remembered. November. Derek had come over alone, without Tiffany, which should have made me feel safe, and instead, I now realized, should have made me more careful. He'd brought papers. He said it was something to do with Dad's old pension records, a correction the county needed, something administrative and boring. He'd set them on the kitchen table and talked while I signed, the way you talk to someone while they're parallel parking, keeping their attention elsewhere. I hadn't read every page. Why would I? It was Derek. It was my son. I went to my filing cabinet. I found the copies. He had given me copies, which I now understood was deliberate, to prevent me from becoming suspicious too quickly. I read them at the kitchen table with my reading glasses and a cup of cold coffee. Power of attorney, not full, limited. Specific to financial management and account access for the purpose of estate planning. Words carefully chosen. Legal enough to open a door, and I had signed it. My own hand, my own name. The fear came then, quietly, the way cold water rises, not a wave. A slow, steady fill. Because I understood what this meant. This was not a smash and grab. This had been planned. This had been planned for months, perhaps longer, with deliberate steps and careful language, and a son who had sat across from me at this kitchen table and looked me in the eyes and talked about pension records while I signed my savings away. How long had he been planning this? Since Gerald died? Since Tiffany entered the picture? Since the Tuesday phone call about Nashville? Was I simply the last item on a list? I allowed myself 10 minutes of fear. I set the timer on the microwave. I am a practical woman. And I sat with it. The hollowness in my stomach. The particular humiliation of being deceived by someone you fed and bathed and loved into existence. The terror of being 71 years old with $12 in a bank account and an Ohio winter still on the ground. When the timer went off, I stood up. I washed my face. I made fresh coffee. And I began to think. The first thing I needed to understand was whether what they had done was criminal or merely cruel. There is a difference, legally, and that difference would determine everything. A forged signature is fraud. A coerced signature under false pretenses is fraud. But a signature, even one obtained through manipulation and misdirection, on a legal document signed willingly by the account holder. That was more complicated. I needed a lawyer, not a general practitioner, not the young man who had handled Gerald's estate, who was pleasant and slow and primarily concerned with real estate transfers. I needed someone who understood elder financial abuse. Because that, I was beginning to understand, was precisely what this was. In Ohio, I knew because I had read carefully, always, all my life. There were laws protecting older adults from financial exploitation. There was the Adult Protective Services Division. There were attorneys who specialized in exactly this. I had read about it years ago in the AARP magazine and thought, how sad. How could anyone do that to an elderly person? And here I was. I wrote 3 things on a yellow legal pad. Call an elder law attorney. Monday morning, first thing. File a report with Adult Protective Services. Do not contact Derek or Tiffany again, not yet. That 3rd item was the hardest. Every mother nerve in my body wanted to call him back, to scream, to demand an explanation, to ask him why. The why most of all, because I still, even then, could not fully hold in my head the image of my son as a man who would do this. But I understood, with a coldness that surprised me, that if I called them now, I would be giving them information. I would be showing my hand. And they were already on a plane. Let them land. Let them feel safe. I had time. I was not going anywhere. The oak tree outside the window stood very still in the early gray light. Gerald had planted a birdhouse in its lower branches the summer before he got sick. A chickadee had lived in it for 3 years running. "All right, Gerald," I said out loud, to the empty kitchen, to the cold coffee, to the 43 years in the walls of this house. "Let's see what I'm made of." Monday came the way important days often do, unremarkably, with thin sunlight and a sky the color of old dishwater. I dressed carefully. Not because appearances matter to attorneys, but because they matter to me, and I needed to feel like myself. Gray slacks. A blue cardigan Gerald had always liked. My good shoes. When you are a 71-year-old woman walking into a law office to report that your son has stolen your life savings, you wear your good shoes. I had called first thing at 8 o'clock. The office of Margaret Osei, Elder Law and Estate Litigation, Columbus, Ohio. I had found her name through the Ohio State Bar Association's referral service. I was not going to leave this to chance or a Google ad. Her assistant had heard the words financial elder abuse and power of attorney and had fit me in at 10:30. That told me something about how common this was, that the slot was available, that the assistant's voice hadn't wavered. Margaret Osei was 50-something, brisk, and had the kind of stillness that comes not from softness, but from seeing too many versions of the same story. She listened to me for 20 minutes without interrupting. Then she asked precise questions. She looked at the document I had brought, the power of attorney Derek had had me sign, and her expression did not change, but her pen moved faster. "This is a limited POA," she said, "signed by you, notarized, technically valid. However, the manner in which it was obtained, under false pretenses without full disclosure of its purpose, constitutes undue influence at minimum and potentially fraud." "Can I get my money back?" I asked. I did not ask whether Derek could go to prison. I asked about the money first, because that was what I had come to get. "Potentially, yes," she said. "If we can demonstrate the funds were transferred using this document under fraudulent circumstances, we can pursue civil recovery. If the transfer was made without your knowledge or consent in any meaningful sense, we can involve law enforcement and the county prosecutor." She paused. "Mrs. Callahan, I need you to understand. This will not be fast, and it may require you to testify against your son." I looked at her steadily. "I understand." She held my gaze for a moment. Then she nodded, once. The nod of one practical woman to another. She assigned a paralegal to request my full account records immediately. She drafted a letter to Adult Protective Services, and she advised me, very clearly, not to speak to Derek or Tiffany until further notice, or, if I must, to record any conversations, which Ohio law permits under single-party consent. I bought a small digital recorder at the Radio Shack on the way home. I put it in my cardigan pocket and kept it there. What I did not know, as I drove home through the gray Columbus morning, was that Derek had already noticed. He had sent a text at 9:47 a.m. while I was sitting in Margaret's office. I saw it when I got back to my car. "Mom, haven't heard from you. Hope you're okay. Call me when you get a chance." The emoji, the deliberate lightness, the faint pressure underneath. He knew I knew, or he suspected. Either way, he was testing the water. I did not respond. Over the next 4 days, as Margaret's office began the formal process of subpoenaing my bank records, I had my first direct evidence delivered to me not by a lawyer or a document, but by accident. Derek's aunt, my late husband's sister, Patrice, who was sharp as a tack at 78 and had never trusted Tiffany from the beginning, called me on a Thursday afternoon. "Dorothy," she said, without preamble, "I need to tell you something. Derek called me last month. He asked if I knew what was in Gerald's will. He asked specifically if you had a secondary account somewhere that Gerald might have kept privately." She paused. "I didn't say anything at the time because I thought he was just being Derek. But then I heard from your neighbor, Carol, that you've been quiet all week. And I got a feeling." I closed my eyes. He had been mapping me, surveying my financial landscape like a developer looking at land before he files for permits. "Patrice," I said carefully, "would you be willing to write down what you just told me? In your own words, signed and dated?" A pause. Then, "Dorothy, honey, I'll do better than that. I'll talk to whoever you need me to talk to." That was it. That was the first proof that this had not been impulsive, that this had been research, that Tiffany and Derek had not simply seized an opportunity. They had constructed one. I called Margaret's office that same afternoon. I told her about Patrice. She said quietly, "Mrs. Callahan, that establishes premeditation. We're past the point of a civil dispute now." I sat in the armchair by the window. Outside, a chickadee was sitting in Gerald's birdhouse, small and bright-eyed against the gray. There was no going back. And for the first time since Sunday morning, sitting in the quiet of my own house with $12 in the bank and my husband's bird in his tree, I felt something that wasn't fear. I felt ready. The plan, as Margaret had laid it out, had 3 moving parts. The first was civil. We had filed for a temporary restraining order on any remaining assets transferred under the fraudulent power of attorney, and Margaret's office had formally requested that the receiving bank freeze the account into which my money had been deposited. That account, the records showed, was a joint account held by Derek and Tiffany. Opened 8 months ago. 2 months after the Sunday dinner where he had brought papers about pension records. The second was criminal. Margaret had submitted a formal referral to the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office, along with Patrice's signed statement and my bank records, documenting the transfer of $94,212 on the day of my dinner, executed via online banking using the limited POA as authorization, with Derek listed as the authorized agent. The third part was mine. I had put together, quietly and carefully, a folder. Every text message, every voicemail saved, the copy of the POA document, Patrice's statement, a timeline written in my own hand of every interaction with Derek and Tiffany in the 14 months before the transfer. Margaret had called it remarkably thorough. I had called it 40 years of keeping records, because Gerald always said that a life well organized is a life half protected. It was on a Wednesday, 9 days after the dinner, that Derek's number appeared on my phone at 7:14 in the morning. I pressed record on the digital recorder. I answered. "Mom." His voice was different. The brightness was gone. "We need to talk." "Go ahead," I said. "I've been getting calls from a bank, from someone claiming to represent a law firm." A pause. "What's going on?" "I imagine you know what's going on, Derek." Silence. Then Tiffany's voice in the background. Not words, just tone, sharp and urgent, telling him something. And then Derek again, his voice dropping into something harder. "Mom, listen to me. You don't want to do this. We were going to talk to you about the Nashville property. This was always going to involve you. We just needed to move quickly." "You signed my name to a transfer of $94,000, I said, without my knowledge, on the day you came to dinner in my house and ate my pot roast." "That is not what—" "Derek." My voice was steady. I was surprised how steady it was. "I have an attorney. I have filed reports. I have documentation. And I have your Aunt Patrice's signed statement about the phone call you made to her last month." Dead silence. And then Tiffany came on the line. She had taken the phone from him. I could picture exactly how she'd done it. The quick reach, the grip. She was the one with the sharper mind, always. Derek was the door. Tiffany was the architect. "Dorothy," she said, soft and smooth as a blade wrapped in silk. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Derek and I are going to come back to Columbus. We're going to sit down with you and explain everything. And I think you'll see that this is all much simpler than it looks. We are family. This is a family matter. Bringing lawyers and prosecutors into this will destroy that. Is that what you want? Was that a threat? A plea? Both, dressed as neither. What I want," I said, "is my money returned within 10 business days and a signed affidavit acknowledging the circumstances of the transfer. If that happens, the conversation about criminal charges remains open. If it does not happen, the conversation closes." Silence. "You are making a very serious mistake," Tiffany said finally. Her voice had changed. The silk was gone. "I've already made my serious mistakes," I said. "I made them when I signed papers I didn't read and loved people I didn't examine closely enough. I don't intend to make any more." I ended the call. My hands were shaking. There it was. The shaking had found me at last. I sat down on the kitchen floor, which is not a dignified thing for a 71-year-old woman to do, but the floor was there, and my legs were not interested in further discussion. I sat there for a few minutes with my back against the cabinets and my recorder in my hand, and the morning light coming through the kitchen window. Then I got up, made coffee, emailed the recording to Margaret. She called me within the hour. "Dorothy," she said, and I could hear something in her voice that might have been the closest Margaret Osei came to warmth. "This is excellent. Do not speak to them again without me." Derek called twice more that day. Tiffany sent a text that said, "You need to reconsider what you're doing to this family." I did not respond to either. I had earned a few days of quiet. Margaret had told me there was nothing for me to do now but wait for the legal machinery to move, and so I let myself rest. I called my friend Ruth, who lives 3 streets over and makes the best peach cobbler in Franklin County, and I asked her if she wanted company. I drove over that evening and sat in her warm kitchen and did not say a single word about Derek or Tiffany or $94,000. We watched 2 episodes of a British baking show, and I slept that night for the first time in 10 days without the calculator running in my head. The offer came on a Friday. Not by phone. They had learned, I think, that phone calls went directly to my recorder, but by email from an address I didn't recognize until I saw Derek's name in the body of the message. A new account, created recently, which told me they had thought about this. The email was written in careful language. Tiffany's language, I recognized it the way you recognize a person's handwriting, by its particular shape. It said that Derek and Tiffany wanted to resolve the misunderstanding and were prepared to return $40,000 immediately as a gesture of good faith if I agreed to withdraw the legal proceedings and sign a mutual release of claims. $40,000 out of $94. They were offering me back less than half of my own money in exchange for my silence. I read the email twice. Then I forwarded it to Margaret without comment. She responded within 20 minutes. Do not reply. This is admissible. They've now put the offer in writing, which is as close to an admission as we're going to get at this stage. I did not reply. Did I feel anything reading that email? Yes. Something complicated, layered. The way old pain is layered. Not temptation exactly. The number was too insulting for that. But something underneath the insult, something that lived below the money entirely. The grief of seeing how little they thought I was worth. $40,000. That was my silence price. That was what 43 years of this house, of these savings, of my son's entire childhood amounted to in their accounting. I let myself feel that for exactly as long as it needed to be felt. Then I filed it away. Derek called once that weekend. I let it go to voicemail. He said he was worried about me and that this whole thing was getting out of hand. There was no brightness left in his voice, no performance, just a flatness that told me he was beginning to understand that the wall he had run into was real. Tiffany did not call. She was watching. I could feel it the way you feel weather. A particular pressure, a certain quality of quiet. The real sustenance of that period came not from legal victories, but from people. Patrice, who called every other day and always started with, "How are you holding up?" and actually waited for the answer. Ruth, who began showing up at my door unannounced with casseroles, and the particular companionship of a woman who knows when to talk and when to simply sit. And then, through Ruth, I found something I had not expected. Ruth mentioned that her church ran a support group. Not grief, not AA. A group specifically for older adults who had experienced financial exploitation by family members. She had learned about it through a friend. She said it gently, the way Ruth does everything, with no pressure and no pity. I went on a Tuesday evening, mostly because sitting alone in my house was beginning to feel like losing before the verdict was in. There were 11 people in the room. A church basement. Folding chairs. Bad coffee. And 11 faces with the same expression I had been seeing in my mirror for 2 weeks. The expression of someone who has been very carefully trusted and very deliberately robbed. I did not speak much that first night. I listened. A man named Howard, 82, had been taken for $200,000 by his nephew over 3 years. A woman named Cecilia, 68, had signed over her house. Another woman, Linda, 64, had given a stepdaughter access to her retirement accounts just for emergencies. Were we foolish? Were we naive? Were we simply old and therefore soft targets in a world that rewards the ruthless? No. We were trusting. We were loving. We had built things and wanted to share them, and the people we chose to share with had made a weapon out of that love. Driving home that Tuesday night through the Columbus dark, I felt something settle in me. Not happiness, not peace, exactly, but something structural, a foundation. I was not alone in this room, or in this fight, or in the particular shame of being deceived by someone you raised or loved or welcomed at your table. I thought of Tiffany, wherever she was, watching and waiting. Watch all you like, I thought. I am not the woman you planned for. They came on a Saturday morning, 3 weeks after the dinner. I saw the car from the kitchen window. Derek's silver Acura, pulling to the curb in front of my house with the careful deliberateness of people who have discussed every move in advance. They sat in the car for almost 2 minutes before getting out. Planning, arranging, making sure they were ready. I had time to set my recorder on the kitchen counter, clearly visible but easily explained as simply being there. I had time to call Margaret and leave a quick voicemail, telling her I had unexpected visitors. I did not call the police. They had done nothing, yet that required police at my door. But I wanted a record that I had been aware. When I opened the door, Tiffany was holding a plant, one of those grocery store orchids in a white pot. She was smiling. Derek stood slightly behind her, his hands in his jacket pockets, looking like a man who would rather be anywhere on earth than on his mother's front porch on a Saturday morning. He was wearing the green jacket I had given him for Christmas 2 years ago. I noticed that. I don't know why I noticed it. Perhaps because it made him look, just for a second, like someone I still recognized. "Mom," he said. "Dorothy?" Tiffany said simultaneously, with the same warm smile she had been manufacturing for 6 years. "We just wanted to come and see you. We've been so worried." I looked at the orchid. I looked at Tiffany. I stepped back and held the door open. They came in. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Derek had brought his papers about pension records in November, the same table where I had signed without reading, the same table where I had sat alone at 3 a.m. counting what I had lost. I made no coffee. I sat across from them and folded my hands. Tiffany spoke first, as I had expected. Derek was the face. She was the voice. "Dorothy, we know this has been painful for you. And honestly, it's been painful for us too. Derek feels terrible about how this was communicated." She paused on communicated with the particular delicacy of someone who has chosen every word. "But we need you to understand that money was going towards something that would benefit all of us. The Nashville property is a real investment. We were going to bring you in as a partner. This was always meant to be a family endeavor." I said nothing. I watched her. She shifted slightly and continued. "The legal proceedings you've started. Dorothy, do you understand what this does to Derek? To his record? He works in property management. A fraud charge, even an allegation, could end his career. Could you live with that? Could you look at yourself in the mirror knowing you did that to your own son?" There it was, the turning point, the thing they had driven here to deliver. Could I live with that? Derek was watching me now, and for just a moment, I saw something real in his face. Not remorse, exactly, but desperation. The desperation of a man who has made a calculated bet and is watching the calculation fail. And underneath the desperation, something else. Something younger. Something that remembered being 12 years old and breaking the kitchen window with a baseball and sitting at this very table waiting to see what I would do. Tiffany's hand was on the table, very still. She was waiting. Was I tempted? I examined myself honestly, the way Margaret had taught me to examine documents, looking for what was really written, not what I hoped to find. And yes, there was something. The pull of it. The old reflex of a mother's love. The desire to make the pain stop for everyone. The familiar urge to solve a problem by absorbing it. To protect Derek, as I had always protected Derek, from the consequences of the things he chose to do. But he was 44 years old, and he had sat at this table and deceived me. "I appreciate you coming," I said. My voice was calm. I was a little surprised by how calm it was. I want to say a few things clearly so there is no confusion. First, the legal proceedings are not something I have the power to stop at this point. I have filed reports with the county prosecutor's office. Those are not private negotiations I can simply retract. Second, what Derek has done, or rather, what you both have done, because I think we all understand who planned this, has consequences. Real ones. That is not my doing. It is yours. Tiffany's smile was gone. Third, I said, you may want to use a son's future and a mother's guilt as leverage. I understand why. It's the sharpest tool you have. I paused. But I am 71 years old. My husband is dead. My savings are gone. And I have nothing left to lose that you haven't already taken. So the leverage doesn't work. Derek stood up. His face was red. This is insane. You're destroying our family over money. You destroyed it over money, I said quietly. You just assumed I would accept the destruction. Tiffany put her hand on Derek's arm. Quick, firm. The gesture of someone managing an asset rather than comforting a husband. Her eyes were on me. They were very flat now, those eyes. The warmth performance had been removed entirely. What was left was something I recognized. Calculation. Pure, cold, unadorned. I had seen that look once before, at Thanksgiving 3 years ago, when Tiffany had watched Gerald's antique clock on the mantelpiece for just a half-second too long. I had told myself I imagined it. I had not imagined it. You're making an enemy, she said softly. I already have one, I said. 2, as it turns out. At least now we all know. They left. Tiffany didn't take the orchid. It sat on my kitchen table after they were gone, and I looked at it for a long time. A living thing offered as theater. Roots wrapped in plastic. No soil deep enough to hold it. Then I put it in the trash. Some gifts are not gifts. That night, lying in bed in the dark, I felt it. The fear, real and physical, pressing on my sternum. They had looked at me with those eyes, and I knew with the certainty of long experience that they were not finished. People like Tiffany are never finished. They recalculate. They reposition. They find a new angle the way water finds a crack. Patiently, without drama, with complete indifference to what gets damaged in the process. But I lay in the dark, and I let the fear run through me. And I found that on the other side of it was something harder and quieter. Resolution. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that has already decided and is simply waiting for the world to catch up. I reached over and turned off the lamp. Tomorrow there was work to do. The hearing was set for a Thursday in April. It was not a criminal trial. Not yet. It was a civil proceeding before a Franklin County judge requested by Margaret's office to determine whether the power of attorney used to authorize the transfer of my funds had been obtained by fraud and undue influence, and whether the funds should be ordered returned pending the outcome of the criminal referral. Margaret had explained it to me carefully over 2 meetings and 1 long phone call, so that I would walk into that courtroom understanding every word that was spoken and every silence in between. This was the door that opened everything else. If the judge found the POA voidable, the money transfer became legally unauthorized. And an unauthorized transfer of $94,212 from an elderly person's account is, in Ohio, a felony. I wore Gerald's favorite color, navy, good shoes, my small gold earrings that I have worn to every important occasion since 1987. I ate breakfast before I left the house. Oatmeal with honey, the same breakfast I have eaten before every difficult thing in my adult life, because I was not going to walk into that room lightheaded. Derek and Tiffany arrived with an attorney. A man I did not recognize, youngish, in a suit that cost more than I had in my bank account at the moment. Tiffany was dressed carefully, conservative, understated, performing a humility she did not possess. She had pulled her hair back, which she almost never did. She had chosen clothes that said reasonable person in the same deliberate way she had chosen the orchid as costume. Derek looked like he hadn't been sleeping. There were shadows under his eyes and a tightness in his jaw. And when he saw me across the corridor, he looked away quickly, the way people look away from something that accuses them simply by existing. Could he still have looked me in the eyes? I wondered about that. I wonder still. Margaret was steady beside me, her briefcase on the table, her face arranged in the neutral expression of someone who has done this many times and knows exactly what she is doing. I was grateful for that steadiness. It was like standing next to a wall, not cold exactly, but solid. Reliable in the way that only structure can be reliable. The judge was a woman in her 60s, the Honorable Patricia Walters. Silver hair, reading glasses, no apparent interest in theater. She wanted facts. She was going to get them. What Derek and Tiffany's attorney argued at considerable length was that the power of attorney had been explained to me and signed willingly, that Derek had acted within its scope, that the transfer was intended as the first installment of a collaborative investment, and that the legal action was the result of a family misunderstanding being escalated by outside interference, which I understood to mean Margaret. Margaret let him finish. She was very good at letting people finish. Then she presented, in order, my original bank records, showing $94,212 before the dinner and $12.47 after. The power of attorney document, with a notary certification timestamp showing it had been notarized 2 days after Derek's November visit, meaning the document I had signed was not the document that was filed. Someone had altered it. Someone had taken it from my kitchen table and brought it to a notary and had it stamped on a version I had never seen. I heard Derek make a sound. Not a word, a sound, when that came out. Beside him, Tiffany went very still. Their attorney leaned toward them and said something in a low voice. Neither of them responded. They were looking at the document on the screen at the front of the courtroom, and I watched them understand that this particular door had closed. Patrice's sworn statement, read into the record in full, describing Derek's inquiry about hidden accounts, the careful, probing questions of a man surveying terrain before he moves. The email offering $40,000 in good faith, which Margaret described precisely as a written acknowledgement that $94,212 was transferred and an implicit admission that the circumstances of the transfer were improper. Their attorney objected. The judge overruled him with a single word. And then the recording. Tiffany's voice, in this quiet courtroom, coming through a small speaker on Margaret's table, smooth and soft and exactly as I remembered it from my kitchen. You are making a very serious mistake, and mine. I've already made my serious mistakes. I made them when I signed papers I didn't read and loved people I didn't examine closely enough. The courtroom was very quiet when it finished. The judge's expression did not change, but she took off her reading glasses and looked at Derek for a long moment. Not at his attorney, not at the documents, at Derek himself. The way you look at someone when you want them to understand that you see them clearly and completely. Derek did not look back. Their attorney asked for a recess. The judge gave him 10 minutes. In those 10 minutes, standing in the corridor with Margaret, I watched Derek and Tiffany argue in low, urgent voices in the far corner. Tiffany was speaking rapidly, her hands moving in small, controlled gestures, the gestures of someone still trying to manage a situation that had passed beyond management. Derek kept shaking his head. Once he pressed both hands against his temples, and I thought of all the times I had watched that same gesture when he was a boy overwhelmed by something he could not solve. Once he looked down the corridor at me, and I held his gaze steadily, and this time he did not look away. He looked at me for 3 full seconds. He looked like a man who was seeing something for the first time, what he had done, perhaps, what it had cost, what it was going to cost further. Were they still a united front? I wasn't sure anymore. A crack had opened between them, thin as a fault line, and I suspected it had been there for some time. When we returned to the courtroom, Derek's attorney made a brief statement. His client, he said, was prepared to cooperate fully with the court in determining the appropriate disposition of the transferred funds. He did not use the word return. He did not apologize, but he did not fight. Judge Walters ruled from the bench. The power of attorney was void. The notary discrepancy alone was sufficient, and she said so plainly. The transfer was deemed unauthorized. She ordered the immediate freeze of Derek and Tiffany's joint account, pending a full criminal investigation, and issued a civil judgment requiring the return of $94,212 within 30 days. She then made a remark that I will remember until the end of my life. She looked at Derek, not at his attorney, at Derek himself. And she said, "The court hopes that the legal process that follows provides an opportunity for serious reflection on the harm done. Not only the financial harm, the personal harm, to someone who trusted you." Derek said nothing. His jaw was tight. Tiffany looked at the table in front of her with the focused blankness of someone who has decided that if she does not move, she will not be seen. I looked at the oak tree I had planted in my mind, the one I had been growing since that Monday morning when I had put on my good shoes and walked into Margaret's office with my papers in order and my voice steady. I felt it there, solid, rooted, indifferent to weather, not triumph, something quieter. The particular satisfaction of a thing done rightly, under difficult circumstances, with no shortcuts taken and no self betrayed. Outside the courthouse, in the April air, Margaret shook my hand. "Well done, Dorothy," she said. I thought of Gerald. I thought of $12.47. I thought of the kitchen floor where I had sat with my back against the cabinets because my legs had given out, and of the yellow legal pad with 3 items written on it in the dark of a Monday morning. "We're not done yet," I said. She almost smiled. "No, but we're close." The 30 days came and went. Derek and Tiffany did not return the money voluntarily within the court's window. I had not expected them to. People who make the choices they made do not, as a rule, find it easy to reverse course simply because a judge has told them to. They exhaust every remaining option first. It is, in a way, the same quality that made them thieves, the belief that another move is always available, that the game has not yet ended, that there is always one more angle they haven't tried. Their attorney filed 2 motions to extend the payment deadline. Both were denied. The Franklin County Prosecutor's Office had, by this point, completed its own investigation. The notary discrepancy, the fact that the document Derek had filed bore a certification dated 2 days after my signature, had led investigators to the notary herself, a woman named Brenda Cho, who had provided a sworn statement that Derek had brought the document to her office alone, that she had not witnessed any signing, and that she had notarized it as a favor because he was a regular client and she had assumed it was routine. She had realized her mistake when the subpoena arrived. She was cooperating fully. In May, Derek was charged with 2 counts of felony theft from an elderly person, 1 count of forgery, and 1 count of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Tiffany was charged as a co-conspirator, 1 count of felony theft, 1 count of exploitation. Their attorney negotiated through June and July. They entered plea agreements in August. Derek received 18 months in a minimum security facility and 3 years of supervised probation. Tiffany received 12 months and 4 years of probation. Both were ordered to pay full restitution. The $94,212 was returned to my account in 2 installments. The first from the frozen joint account, the second from assets seized as part of the restitution order. The final transfer arrived on a Tuesday morning in September. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my tea when my phone showed the notification. I looked at the number for a long time. Then I called Patrice. "It's done," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Gerald would be proud of you, Dorothy." I had to set the phone down for a minute after that. Not because I was sad, because some things sit in the chest too large to speak around. Margaret filed the closing documentation. She sent me a handwritten note, just 4 lines, which surprised me. I had not taken her for a note writer. She said that in 22 years of elder law practice, she had seen many cases like mine, but few clients who had approached the process with such composure and such thoroughness. She said that both qualities had mattered to the outcome. I have kept that note in the filing cabinet between the case documents. Gerald would have appreciated it. He was also a thorough man. Did I feel sorry for Derek? I have asked myself that question many times. The honest answer is, not the way a mother is supposed to feel sorry for a child. I felt something that lives in the same neighborhood as grief, but is not quite grief. The recognition of a loss that happened long before the dinner, long before the papers, long before Tiffany. The loss of the son I had believed him to be. That loss I mourned, quietly and privately, the way I mourned Gerald, in the mornings, with my tea, in the company of the oak tree and the chickadee's house, but for what he had done. No, I did not soften it. I did not ask the prosecutor for leniency. I did not write a letter to the court on his behalf. Margaret had asked early on whether I intended to. I had said no. He is an adult, I had told her. He made adult choices. The consequences are for the court to determine, not for me to cushion. She had written that down. I tell you this not to seem hard. I am not a hard woman. I am a woman who loved a son and was betrayed by that love and chose, when the choice was offered, to stand in the truth rather than the comfort. There is a difference between hardness and clarity. I hope I stayed on the right side of that line. The oak tree was fully leafed by the time the final gavel fell. Summer in Columbus, green and warm, the yard full of the sounds of the neighborhood in the long evenings. I sat on the porch more often than I had in years. Ruth came by. Patrice visited, and we cooked Sunday dinner and talked for 3 hours about everything except Derek. I was 71 years old. I had $94,212 back in the bank. I had my house and my oak tree and Gerald's birdhouse and my good shoes. I had chosen myself when it mattered. That, as it turned out, was enough. The autumn after the case closed, I did something I had been meaning to do for years. I booked a trip. Not extravagant. I am still a practical woman. But I had always wanted to see the coast of Maine in the fall, the rocky shores and the cold, bright water, and the towns that looked like nothing had changed in 100 years. Gerald and I had planned it the way people plan things they fully intend to get to eventually. We never got to eventually. I went alone. I stayed in a small inn in Camden for 5 days. The kind of place where the innkeeper knows your name by the second morning. I walked along the harbor. I sat on rocks above the Atlantic in the October wind and looked out at the water and felt for the first time in a very long time uncomplicated. When I came home, I called the elder law support group Ruth had introduced me to. I asked if they needed a volunteer. They did. Someone to sit with new members in their first sessions. People who had just arrived carrying the particular weight of what had been done to them. I understood that weight. I knew how to help set it down without pretending it wasn't there. I began going every Tuesday evening. I brought decent coffee, because the church basement coffee was genuinely unacceptable. I updated my will with Margaret, who had become something close to a friend. I established a revocable living trust. I restructured my accounts with proper protections. Gerald's money was not going to be vulnerable again, and I planted a serviceberry tree in the backyard. It will take years to establish. I will probably not see it fully grown, but I planted it anyway, because that is what you do when you intend to keep living. As for Derek and Tiffany, I tell you what became of them not with satisfaction but with honesty. Derek served 11 months before being released on probation. He lost his position at the property management company within a week of the charges. He spent the following months in Cincinnati, working in a warehouse. Patrice said he had aged the way people age when they finally have time to look at themselves. I do not know if he has truly looked. I hope, for his sake, that he has. Tiffany served 8 months and did not return to Derek. She had always understood something he hadn't, that the Nashville plan was hers. Derek had been the instrument. When instruments break, you find new ones. She relocated to Phoenix. The Nashville property never happened. The money had been sitting in their joint checking account, waiting for a second transfer that never came. 40 years of carefully built security, stolen for something that didn't even exist yet. I have sat with that fact many times. I don't have a satisfying explanation. Perhaps there isn't one. What I know is this. I am 72 now. I live in a house I have owned for 44 years. My savings are whole. My mornings are mine. The chickadee returns to Gerald's birdhouse every spring without fail, and the serviceberry tree is putting out new growth. I did not choose to be tested this way, but I was tested, and I chose to stand. That turns out to be its own kind of life. So, here is what I know at the end of this. Love is not the same as trust. Trust must be earned, even by the people closest to you, especially by the people closest to you. Document your life. Know what you sign. And if someone takes from you what cannot be replaced, do not absorb it. Do not excuse it. Stand up, put on your good shoes, and walk into the right office. You are never too old to fight for yourself. What would you have done in my place? Tell me in the comments, and if this story stayed with you, please share it. Someone out there may need it today. Thank you for listening.